Did you know that a man who preached family values from every stage, every church pulpit, and every campaign banner had stolen $250,000 from me and thought he'd get away with it? The hypocrisy would have made anyone's blood boil, but when I realized he was building his spotless image for an upcoming election while standing on the bones of my savings, I knew silence would be a crime. I didn't just get even. I told the world. I put it in print for every voter to see. It all started 5 years earlier, long before the banners and smiling campaign ads. Back then, he was just Richard Calloway, a local businessman with a spotless suit, a warm handshake, and the uncanny ability to make you feel like he'd known you all his life. He wasn't in politics yet, not officially, but he was laying the groundwork. And I, naive and maybe too trusting for my own good, believed him when he pitched me an opportunity. "Think of it as an investment in community," Richard had said across the polished oak of his office desk. His voice was low, smooth, the kind that could calm a storm. "This development project will give jobs, revive a dead part of town, and line your pockets. Win-win." I remember shifting in my chair, looking at the glossy brochures spread out before me, artists' renderings of bustling storefronts, happy families walking on clean sidewalks, even a little playground in the corner. He was good, too good. "I don't usually get involved in real estate," I admitted. "But you're saying the returns are solid?" Richard leaned forward, flashing that practiced grin. "Solid as the ground under your feet. And I wouldn't bring you in if I didn't think this was right. Family's the core of everything, you know. And family doesn't let family down." That line, "family doesn't let family down," I'd come to hate it later. At first I bought in. I transferred $250,000, my nest egg, the money I'd saved from years of grinding work and cautious living, into his venture. Richard sent me reports, glossy updates about progress and permits. Months stretched into a year, then another. Each time I asked when the development would break ground, he had excuses ready. Zoning delays, a contractor falling through, banks dragging their heels. Always plausible, always just enough to buy another few months of patience. Then one night, in the back booth of a little bar where I nursed my doubts with whiskey, a mutual acquaintance slipped me the truth. "There ain't no development," he said, shaking his head. "Calloway's been funneling that money into his campaign chest. You didn't know?" The words hit me like a hammer to the chest. I called Richard the next morning, my hands trembling as I dialed. "Where is my money?" I demanded, skipping past greetings. He sighed, the kind of weary exhale you give a child who doesn't understand. "It's tied up. You know that. You'll see it when the project starts rolling, just trust me." But something in his voice faltered, and I knew. He was lying. Weeks of digging confirmed it. Public records, donation filings, whispers around town, they all pointed the same direction. My money, my life's savings, had been siphoned into the engine of his political ambition. Yard signs with his face, billboards about honesty and integrity, radio ads about protecting families, every dollar I'd given him dressed up as morality and beamed out to voters. I confronted him once more, this time in person. His campaign office was buzzing with volunteers and phones ringing off the hook. He stepped out into the hallway when he saw me, still wearing that plastic smile. "You need to leave," he said softly, but firmly. "This isn't the time or place." "You stole from me." My voice was steady, colder than I felt. $250,000. Do you think I won't do something about it?" Richard's smile twitched. His eyes hardened just for a second, then smoothed back into politician's charm. "You don't want to drag your name through the mud. You'd be hurting yourself more than me." That was the moment something inside me snapped. He thought his image, his shining family values act, was untouchable. He thought I'd fold under the threat of shame, but I wasn't going to bury it. I was going to bury him. I went to the Gazette. My old friend Caroline was still an editor there, the type of journalist who smelled blood in the water and wouldn't let go. I gave her everything. Wire transfers, bank records, emails, even the slick brochures he'd used to bait me. "Jesus, this is gold," she muttered, flipping through the folder late one night in her office. "You're telling me the man running on God, family, and decency embezzled his neighbor's savings to bankroll his campaign?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." She looked at me over the rim of her glasses, eyes sharp. "Once this hits print, there's no going back. They'll come after you, too." I leaned back, exhaustion and fury weighing on me like stone. Let them. I'm done being quiet. When the story broke, the town practically vibrated with shock. Headlines screamed, "Family Values Candidate Accused of Stealing $250K. Neighbors stopped me on the street, half whispering, half shouting, "Is it true?" Richard's campaign office went silent overnight. The calls to his radio show dried up. Churches where he'd been a guest speaker suddenly scrubbed his name from bulletins. But the real theater was at the next debate. The auditorium was packed, cameras rolling, when his opponent leaned forward at the podium and asked, "Mr. Calloway, would you like to explain how family values include stealing $250,000 from a man who trusted you?" The audience erupted, gasps, shouts, even boos. Richard stammered, face blotching red, trying to spin it as a misunderstanding. But the damage was done. His mask had cracked. And me? I sat in the back row, arms crossed, watching him sweat. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. I hadn't just gotten justice. ID made sure the world saw him for what he truly was. What I didn't know then was how far Richard would go to claw back his image, or how dangerous it could get once his perfect facade had been ripped away. Richard didn't disappear overnight. Men like him never did. They lingered, clawing at whatever scraps of influence they could salvage, twisting the truth until it bent into something that might still serve them. After the article broke, his campaign staggered but didn't fall. He doubled down, crying foul, calling me a disgruntled investor who had misunderstood the risks of a failed project. On television, he looked into the camera with teary eyes and said, "It hurts when people you've tried to help turn against you." The man was a master performer, and for a while, it worked on some folks. But the whispers were growing louder. At the diner where I usually had my morning coffee, two old men in ball caps leaned over their plates of scrambled eggs. "Can't believe it," one muttered. "All that talk about God and family, and he's no better than a thief." "Worse," the other spat. "A thief done to pretend he is saving your soul while he is picking your pocket." The community was starting to see him clearly, but Richard wasn't done. One night, I came home to find a white envelope shoved under my front door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words scrawled across it in blocky letters. "You will regret what you did." My first instinct was to laugh, some childish attempt at intimidation. But then I thought about who I was dealing with. Richard had money, connections, loyal volunteers who saw him as some savior. He didn't need to dirty his hands when there were plenty of people willing to do it for him. I called Caroline at the Gazette. "They're trying to scare you," she said flatly after hearing me read the note. "Classic tactic. It means we hit a nerve." "You think it's him?" "Who else? Listen, we'll double-check the sources. I'll get my legal team to backstop the story. You just stay sharp, okay?" But I couldn't just sit still. If Richard thought threats would shut me up, he hadn't learned a damn thing. So I dug deeper. Through late nights, dusty archives, and hours spent with clerks who didn't care if I lingered, I pieced together a trail of financial wreckage stretching back years. Richard had left behind a wake of failed ventures, a landscaping business that collapsed after siphoning investor money, a chain of convenience stores that went bankrupt, while his own accounts fattened even a charity that had vanished with thousands of dollars meant for local children. Each time he had wriggled free, paid off the right people, blamed the wrong ones, smiled just enough to make folks doubt their own anger. Now he'd chosen politics as his shield. I confronted him again, not in private this time, but in the middle of a crowded coffee shop. I walked in, spotted him shaking hands with a group of retirees, and marched straight over. "You ruined lives before mine, didn't you?" My voice cut through the chatter, sharp as glass. "This isn't the first time you've stolen from people who trusted you." The retirees froze, eyes darting between us. Richard's face tightened, but his voice oozed calm. "This man," he said, gesturing toward me, "is angry about an investment that didn't work out. He's trying to tarnish a good name with baseless accusations." I pulled a folder from under my arm and slammed it onto the table. "Bankruptcy records, court filings, your so-called charities tax returns. Want to call these baseless too?" The room went silent, except for the hum of the espresso machine. Richard's smile faltered. "Leave," he hissed under his breath, low enough that only I heard. "You don't know who you're playing with." I leaned closer, my words a whisper. "Neither do you." By the time I walked out, half the cafe was murmuring, whispering my name, his name. The story was spreading like wildfire, no matter how hard he tried to stamp it out. The next week, Caroline published a follow-up piece. Not just about me, about all of them. The landscaper, the store owners, the parents of kids who never saw a dime of charity money. It was a pattern, and it painted Richard not as an unlucky businessman, but as a predator who wore respectability like a mask. That's when things escalated. One evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed the streetlight at the corner was out. Shadows swallowed the yard. I shut off the engine, stepped out, and the crunch of gravel behind me made my stomach tighten. "Hell of a story you're spreading," a voice said from the dark. Deep, gravelly, not Richard's. I turned slowly. A man leaned against a car parked by the curb, arms folded, face half hidden in the gloom. "You're with him?" I said, my throat dry. He smirked. "I'm with whoever pays. And right now, you're making the wrong man look bad." The air seemed to thicken. I clenched my fists, refusing to step back. "You planning to scare me off?" "Maybe. Or maybe I just remind you that accidents happen." He pushed off the car and stepped closer, his shoes crunching against the gravel. "Best you let it drop. Last warning." Then he slipped into the shadows, leaving me standing in my driveway with my pulse hammering in my ears. I realized then that Richard wasn't just fighting for votes, he was fighting for survival, and a man like that, cornered and desperate, was far more dangerous than I'd imagined, but I wasn't about to back down. If he wanted a war, I'd give him one. What I didn't know yet was how deep his claws ran, how far his influence reached, and how close the battle would come to destroying everything I thought I could rely on. The first real blow came not from Richard himself, but from the people I least expected. My own circle. 2 weeks after the shadow in my driveway, I walked into my office to find whispers swirling like cigarette smoke. My business partner, Alan, wouldn't meet my eyes. By noon, I knew why. Word was spreading that I had misused funds, that the $250,000 wasn't stolen. It was laundered, hidden, and now I was scapegoating an innocent man to cover my tracks. Richard's fingerprints were all over it. When I stormed into Alan's office, he barely raised his head from the paperwork. "You'd better tell me this isn't true," he muttered, his tone brittle. "Of course it isn't true," I snapped. "You think I'd sink my own money just to run a smear campaign?" Alan rubbed his temples. "I don't know what to think. But people are talking. Investors are skittish. If Richard's got proof—" "Proof?" I barked out a laugh. "He's got lies, that's all. Lies and a machine to spread them." But I knew then that Richard was playing dirtier than ever. He wasn't just defending himself. He was trying to gut my credibility until I had nothing left. That night, I called Caroline again. She answered on the first ring. "He's trying to flip the narrative," I said, pacing my living room. "People think I'm the thief now. Can you counter this?" Caroline sighed. "I'll try, but understand, mud sticks. Once people hear both sides, they decide it's he said, he said. Some folks just throw up their hands and tune it out. He's running for office on a foundation of lies. If the town buys this, they won't. She cut me off, firm now. Not if we keep pressing. You've got to stay steady. Don't let him rattle you. Steady. Easier said than done when I felt the ground shifting under me every day. The worst came at Sunday dinner with my parents. My father, a stern man who believed in handshakes and honor, leaned across the table with narrowed eyes. "Son," he said, his fork clinking against the plate. "I've been hearing things. About money. About slander. If there's truth in it, there isn't." I slammed my palm against the table harder than I meant to. My mother flinched. "Dad, he stole from me. That's the truth. He's turning it around to protect himself." Silence stretched. My father finally leaned back, but his face was clouded with doubt. Richard's lies had reached my own home. I left dinner early, my appetite gone, the old oak door shutting behind me with a heavy finality. If Richard could poison the people closest to me, what chance did I have with strangers? I almost gave in that night. Almost decided it wasn't worth the fight. But as I sat in the dark, staring at the envelope still tucked in my desk drawer, the one that had promised I'd regret telling the truth, I remembered his smirk, his condescension, the way he had told me I'd be hurting myself more than him, and something inside me hardened. If Richard wanted to drag me through the mud, I'd wade in it up to my neck if that's what it took to expose him. So I pushed back harder. Caroline and I went public again, this time with documents Richard couldn't spin. Court records, notarized contracts, bank wires, all with his name tied directly to failed ventures and siphoned funds. We didn't just tell the story of one man's theft, we mapped the pattern of his entire career of deceit. The Gazette published a front-page spread under the headline, "The Callaway Pattern, How One Man's Family Values Masked a Trail of Betrayal." The town lit up. Radio hosts debated it for hours. At the farmer's market, I overheard someone mutter, "If half this is true, he shouldn't be running for dog catcher, let alone office." But Richard wasn't finished. A week later, I was subpoenaed. His lawyers claimed I had defamed him, that my accusations had caused irreparable harm to his campaign and reputation. The lawsuit demanded damages, $500,000. When I read the papers, my chest went cold. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was war in the courts, where money mattered more than truth, and Richard had far more of it than I did. Caroline met me outside the courthouse on the day of the first hearing. She gripped my shoulder. "Don't cave. This is the move of a desperate man. The fact that he's suing you means our story hurt him badly. But what if he buries me in legal fees before the election?" "Then we'll make that the story too," she said, her eyes hard. "A man so desperate to hide the truth that he weaponizes the courts. People will see it." Inside the courthouse, Richard sat at the plaintiff's table, immaculate as ever. Dark suit, polished shoes, hair combed to perfection. He smiled at me across the room, but it wasn't the politician's smile anymore. It was sharper, colder. The smile of a man who thought he'd finally cornered me. As I sat down, I whispered under my breath, "Not yet, Richard. Not yet." What I didn't realize then was that this courtroom fight would open doors I hadn't dared to touch. Doors leading to secrets far darker than stolen money. Secrets that could ruin not just Richard, but the people who had kept him untouchable for years. The fire changed something in me. Up until then, I'd been trying to fight Richard with evidence, court filings, and headlines. I thought the truth alone would be enough. Standing there in the driveway at dawn, my garage smoldering behind the yellow tape, I realized truth wasn't a sword in this fight. It was a flashlight in a pit full of snakes. I didn't tell Caroline right away. She would have insisted I go to the police, but I'd already seen how easily Richard's influence slithered into official channels. Instead, I drove out of town, past the blinking streetlights and gas stations, until the land flattened into empty fields. There, in a diner no one from my circle ever visited, I met Marcus. He slid into the booth opposite me, his eyes flicking to the window before he spoke. "You're lucky you weren't inside when that fire started." "I wasn't lucky," I said flatly. "They wanted the records. They didn't care about me, yet." Marcus leaned closer. "We're past yet. These people don't bluff. If they burned your garage, they're ready to burn you too." I stared at my coffee. "How far does this go?" He hesitated, then pulled a thumb drive from his jacket and set it on the table. "Farther than you think. I followed the campaign money like you asked. It doesn't stop at Richard. It runs through shell companies in 3 states and ends up in the pack of a sitting senator. If you take this public, it's not just Calloway's seat you're threatening. It's an entire machine." I pushed the drive back toward him. "Keep it." "You're kidding." "No. We do this right or we don't do it at all. If I go public now with only half the picture, they'll smear me harder, bury me faster. We need it airtight." Marcus studied me for a long moment. "Then you need someone who can protect you while you build the case. This isn't just a scandal anymore, this is organized." I left the diner at sunrise, the thumb drive heavy in my pocket after all. I drove straight to Caroline's apartment, pounding on her door until she opened it, hair tousled, eyes wide. "They torched my garage," I said before she could speak, "and Marcus traced the money. It's worse than we thought." She stepped aside, letting me in. "Show me." We plugged the drive into her laptop and watched the map unfold. Arrows of money crossing state lines, donations ballooning in strange districts, everything funneling back to Richard's spotless campaign like veins to a poisoned heart. Caroline exhaled sharply. "If we print this, they'll come after you too," I said quietly. "I've had worse," she muttered, but her hands trembled as she scrolled. "Jesus, this is huge. This could take down half the party leadership in the state." I rubbed my temples. "And me, if we screw it up." For the next 2 weeks, we built the story in secret. Caroline locked her files behind passwords no one else at the paper knew. Marcus routed his research through offshore servers. I stopped sleeping at home, bouncing between motels with cameras in the hallways. Every time a car slowed near me or a stranger lingered too long, my pulse jumped. Still, the net was tightening. In court, Richard's lawyers grew sharper, nastier, trying to paint me as unstable, obsessed, dangerous. The judge allowed our evidence, but warned us about grandstanding. Richard himself barely looked at me now. His mask of charm had hardened into something brittle and mean. The final straw came one evening when Caroline called me from an unknown number, whispering into the phone. "They followed me," she said. 2 cars. Same guys who were at the courthouse last week. I ducked into a hotel lobby and lost them. My stomach turned to stone. "Get somewhere safe. Now, I'll meet you." That night, we sat in a corner booth of a greasy truck stop, her laptop open between us, the glow of the screen reflecting off our coffee cups. "They're not going to stop," she said. "We have enough to nuke his whole operation, but we'll be dead in the water if we don't release it perfectly. We need someone bigger, federal level, someone who can't be bought off." I thought about it. I still had one contact in Washington, an old law school friend now working as an investigator for the DOJ's Public Corruption Unit. We hadn't spoken in years. He owed me nothing. But maybe, just maybe, he'd listen. I found his number, dialed, and when he answered, my voice was steady. "Tom, it's me. I've got something you're going to want to see. It's about a candidate named Richard Calloway, and it's not just him." Silence on the line. Then, "Meet me in D.C. Bring everything." We drove through the night, 3 states and countless gas stations, the thumb drive tucked into a hollowed-out book under the seat. Every car behind us felt like a tale. Every truck stop felt like an ambush waiting to happen. Caroline stayed awake, watching the mirrors. By the time we reached D.C., dawn was breaking again. We met Tom in a quiet cafe near the DOJ building. He listened without interrupting as Marcus's map filled his laptop screen. When we finished, He closed the lid and looked at me. "You understand what you've got here?" he asked. "I understand enough," I said. "I just want him stopped." Tom shook his head. "If we do this right, we're not just stopping him. We're tearing a hole in the curtain. But you need to disappear while we move. You'll be a target." Caroline reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We've come this far." Tom's eyes hardened. "Then get ready, because once we pull the trigger, there's no going back." I nodded slowly. I'd started this war to get my money back. Now it was about something far bigger. Dragging into the light a network of predators who'd hidden behind family values and smiles. And as scared as I was, a single thought kept me steady. For the first time in years, Richard Calloway wasn't in control anymore. Not of the story. Not of me. Not of what came next. We didn't go home. We didn't even book a hotel under our own names. Tom had warned us the minute we left the cafe that if we wanted this thing to stick, we had to go completely dark for a few days while he moved. He put us in touch with 2 federal marshals who whisked us into a bland, beige, safe apartment on the edge of the city. No phones except a secured line, no social media, no stepping outside except under escort. Caroline paced like a caged animal. "We're not criminals," she muttered for the 100th time. "Why does this feel like we're the ones hiding?" "Because we just lit a match in a powder room," I said. "And everyone who has been eating off Calloway's table is going to want to snuff it out before it explodes." Tom called once a day, never long enough for questions. All he would say was, "The case is moving, stay put." The third night, after we'd eaten microwave dinners in silence, Caroline finally turned to me. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "If you'd just let him keep the money, you'd still have your life." I stared at the wall, remembering Richard's voice in the coffee shop, the note shoved under my door, the flames devouring my garage. He would have done it to someone else, maybe worse, maybe someone who couldn't fight back. I can't live with that. She nodded, eyes shining but resolute. "Then we finish it." The next morning, Tom arrived in person, wearing a cheap jacket and sunglasses. He shut the apartment door and sat across from us, pulling a file from his bag. "It's done," he said. "Warrants, subpoenas, the works. We moved before they could shred anything. The feds hit Calloway's campaign office at dawn. His treasurer's already talking. This is going to break wide open." Caroline's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God." Tom slid a photo across the table. It showed boxes of seized documents stacked in an evidence room, the Calloway campaign logo barely visible on some of the binders. "This isn't just campaign finance. There's wire fraud, tax evasion, even RICO angles." "He's finished." A wave of relief crashed over me, but it wasn't clean. It was mixed with exhaustion, anger, and a strange sadness. For years, I'd seen Richard as the man who ruined my life. Now he was just a symbol of something much larger. Tom leaned forward. "You both need to understand, this isn't over. There are people who will try to frame you as the villains. We'll keep you under protection until the indictments drop." 2 days later, the news hit. Family Values candidate indicted on federal charges. Wire fraud, campaign finance violations, racketeering. His mugshot, no smile, just a gaunt, furious stare, was splashed across every network. My phone, locked away in Tom's bag, buzzed non-stop when he handed it back. Dozens of messages, hundreds of emails, friends, strangers, victims from other towns thanking me. Some of them wrote things like, "I lost my savings to him too," or, "I thought no one would ever stop him." On live television, under the glare of studio lights, the host leaned in and asked, "Do you see yourself as a hero?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "No. I see myself as someone who refused to stay quiet. That doesn't make me a hero. It just makes me stubborn. And maybe a little lucky I had the right people beside me." The audience clapped, but I wasn't performing for them. I was speaking to anyone out there still being chewed up by men like Richard, people who thought they couldn't fight back. The book soared. Not bestseller status, but enough to draw the attention of watchdog groups and political reform advocates. They called me for panels, for closed-door discussions about campaign finance and corruption. Me, a man who'd only wanted his $250,000 back, suddenly standing in rooms where people planned ways to make sure it couldn't happen again. But notoriety cuts both ways. One morning, I woke to spray paint across my garage door. Rat. Another time, a brick shattered my front window with a note tied around it. You will regret this too. The FBI took the threat seriously, but no one was caught. Caroline and I learned to live with the paranoia, cameras on our houses, routines altered, eyes always scanning. It was exhausting, but every time I thought about walking away, I remembered the letter. You saved my life. That anonymous survivor's gratitude was a quiet anchor, holding me steady against the storm. Richard tried appealing his conviction, of course. His lawyers filed motions, citing media bias and unfair persecution. Each one was denied. Eventually, the appeals dried up. The last I heard, he was transferred to a federal prison out of state. Yet even locked away, his shadow lingered. At a conference in D.C., Tom pulled me aside after a panel. We're still untangling his connections, he said. Some of the money trails lead overseas. If we can prove what we think, this isn't just state-level corruption. It's international laundering. And you're telling me this because, I asked. Because you lit the match, he replied. And people up the chain don't forget who started the fire. Be careful. They'll come looking for the source. I walked back to my hotel with a weight in my chest. Even after victory, the danger hadn't disappeared. Still, life moved on. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, normalcy crept back in. My father started inviting me to Sunday dinners again, and though the silences between us were longer than before, they were no longer filled with doubt. Caroline, after months of fighting ghosts, finally laughed without glancing over her shoulder. And one crisp winter morning, I woke to an email that nearly stopped my heart. It was from a name I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but I know him." The message was short. Calloway wasn't the only one. I have proof. If you want to see it, meet me where it all began. Attached was a single photograph, the front of Richard's old campaign office, now empty and abandoned. I sat there staring at the screen, my coffee cooling beside me. I should have deleted it, forwarded it to Tom, walked away. But instead, I felt the old fire spark again. Because maybe the war wasn't over. Maybe Richard had only been the first mask pulled away. And maybe, just maybe, the truth had a lot more faces left to expose. The building was a husk. Richard's old campaign office sat at the corner of Main and 4th, its windows boarded, its sign faded to a ghost of red and blue. Grass poked through cracks in the sidewalk. The town walked past it now like it carried a curse. I parked across the street just after dusk, hands gripping the wheel. The email's words replayed in my head. If you want to see it, meet me where it all began. For a moment, I considered calling Tom, letting the feds handle it. But something told me if I didn't show, the trail might vanish. So I stepped out, my breath clouding in the cold, and crossed the street. The front door was chained shut, but a side entrance, half hidden in shadow, stood ajar. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper. Campaign posters still curled on the walls, Richard's smiling face frozen mid-promise, protecting families, preserving values. My flashlight beam cut across overturned chairs and empty file cabinets. Then I heard it, a cough, low and raspy from the back room. "Hello?" I called, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. A figure stepped forward, thin, stooped, bundled in a threadbare coat. A man in his 60s, maybe 70s. His eyes darted nervously. "You came," he said, voice hoarse. "Who are you?" He held up a trembling hand. Name doesn't matter. What matters is, I worked with him. With Calloway. Not in the campaign before that. One of his so-called ventures. My stomach tightened. You're a victim? Victim, accomplice, take your pick. His laugh was bitter. I helped him move money. Offshore accounts, shell companies. Thought I was being clever. By the time I realized how deep it went, it was too late. But I kept records. He reached into his coat and pulled out a battered envelope sealed with yellowing tape. These names, these transfers, Calloway was just a delivery boy. The real power was higher. Still is. I hesitated, staring at the envelope. Why give this to me? Because you're the only one who burned him, the man rasped. The only one who didn't fold. People like me were ghosts. But you're still visible. They'll come for you too unless someone keeps pulling. He shoved the envelope into my hands, his grip surprisingly strong. Don't trust the local cops. Don't trust half the feds either. You've got one chance. Use it. Before I could respond, a noise outside made us both freeze, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. The old man's eyes widened. They found me, he whispered. Go! The back door burst open, and the beam of a flashlight sliced through the darkness. Two men in dark coats stormed in, their movements too sharp, too coordinated to be random trespassers. Run! The old man barked. Instinct took over. I bolted toward the side door, clutching the envelope. Behind me, I heard a scuffle, a grunt, the sickening thud of impact. By the time I burst into the night air, tires squealed around the corner. A black SUV pulled up, doors flung open. I didn't wait to see who was inside. I sprinted down the alley, heart pounding, ducking into shadows until my lungs burned. I didn't stop until I'd circled 3 blocks and slipped into my car. Hands shaking, I tore open the envelope under the dim light of the dashboard. Inside were photocopies of wire transfers, lists of LLCs, names scrawled in the margins. Some I recognized from local politics. Others, senators, businessmen, people who had no business being connected to Richard Calloway. The web was bigger than I'd ever imagined. I leaned back in my seat, the envelope trembling in my hands. Richard hadn't been an end. He'd been a beginning, a pawn. Just like Tom had said. And now, with this evidence, I was holding something that could expose far more than one crooked politician. But at what cost? The old man's last words echoed in my ears. They'll come for you too. As I drove away from the ghost of Richard's empire, I realized the war I thought I'd won had only been the first battle. The real fight was just beginning. I didn't sleep that night. The envelope sat on my kitchen table like a live bomb. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the old man's face, the desperation in his eyes when he shoved the papers into my hands, the way he'd yelled, "Run!" before the men stormed in. I didn't know if he was alive or lying in some forgotten alley. By sunrise, my decision was made. I called Caroline. She answered on the first ring. "You're alive," she breathed. "When you didn't call last night, I thought, I've got something," I cut in. "Bigger than anything we touched before. Names, transfers, connections. Richard wasn't the end. He was the delivery boy." Silence. Then, "Bring it to me, now." When I arrived at her apartment, she locked every bolt before I even stepped inside. Her eyes widened as I laid the papers on her kitchen counter. "Jesus," she whispered, flipping through the photocopies. "These aren't just small-town crooks. This touches people in D.C., big people." I pointed to one margin note, a name underlined twice. "That's a sitting senator, the same one who spoke at Richard's fundraiser 2 years ago." Caroline's face paled. "If this is real, it's real," I said. "The old man who gave it to me, he risked his life for it." Her hands trembled as she traced the documents. "Then we're sitting on dynamite." We argued for hours. I wanted to take it straight to Tom at the DOJ, But Caroline hesitated. "You heard what the old man said. Don't trust half the feds. What if we hand this over and it disappears? What if the wrong people bury it and then bury us?" She wasn't wrong. Finally, we decided to make copies. Digital scans, encrypted backups, hidden drives. We'd spread it like seeds, so even if someone tried to silence us, the truth wouldn't vanish. That night, I walked back to my car with one of the copies tucked under my jacket. The street was quiet, too quiet. Then, headlights flared at the end of the block. A black sedan. My stomach dropped. I ducked into a side alley, my footsteps echoing off brick walls. The sedan slowed, its engine a low growl, then crept forward. I pressed myself against a dumpster, heart thundering. The car idled at the mouth of the alley for what felt like an eternity before finally rolling past. I didn't move until the taillights disappeared. When I got home, I pulled my curtains tight and sat in the dark, every creak of the house making my pulse spike. I realized then that I wasn't fighting one man anymore, or even one network. I was standing in the crosshairs of something vast, something ruthless. The next morning, Caroline called. Her voice was low, urgent. "They came to my office, not the police. 2 men in suits asking questions about me, about you. My editor swears they flashed real credentials but wouldn't say from where. We don't have much time." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. "Then we move now. We take it public. Full blast. Newspaper, online, social media, everything at once. If we make it too big, they can't erase it." She was silent for a long moment. "You realize once we do that, we can't take it back. They'll come harder." "They already are," I said. That evening, in the glow of her living room, we drafted the story. Not just a follow-up, an expose that named names, mapped the money, laid bare the machine behind Richard Calloway. We scheduled it to drop simultaneously across multiple platforms, synced to the second. As midnight approached, Caroline hovered over the keyboard. "Once I hit this, there's no undo button." I thought of Richard in shackles, the garage fire, the brick through my window, the old man's desperate eyes. Then I nodded. "Do it." She pressed enter. The article went live at 12:01 a.m. sharp. Within minutes, the website crashed from traffic. Copies spread across social media, re-uploaded faster than they could be taken down. Hashtags trended, cable news anchors scrambled. And somewhere, in offices and back rooms and smoke-filled boardrooms, powerful people who had hidden comfortably in the dark suddenly found themselves dragged into the light. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. We'd done it. But as the notifications poured in, one new message appeared in my inbox. No subject, no sender, just a single line of text. "You've made enemies who don't forgive." The war had only just escalated. The message kept me awake all night. I sat at the kitchen table, the glow of my laptop reflecting off half-empty coffee cups, watching the story spread like wildfire. Reporters were calling Caroline non-stop. Senators were issuing statements of shock and outrage. Investigators were scrambling. And yet, all I could think about was that single line. "You've made enemies who done it forgive." By morning, the fallout had already begun. Caroline called me, her voice buzzing with adrenaline. "We did it! It's everywhere! CNN, MSNBC, even Fox is running it. They're calling it the Calloway Network. And get this, the senator named in the documents? He's already denying it, but the DOJ confirmed they've opened an inquiry." I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hunted. As I drove to meet Caroline at the Gazette's office, I noticed the same black sedan again, 2 cars back in traffic following me through 3 turns. My palms went slick on the wheel. At the next intersection, I cut across 2 lanes and swung into a gas station. The sedan slowed but kept rolling, blending back into traffic. By the time I reached the Gazette, I was shaking. Caroline met me at the door, her smile bright but strained. "You look like hell." "They're watching me," I muttered, "following me. This isn't paranoia anymore." Her face hardened. "Then we don't go anywhere alone. Not anymore." Inside, chaos reigned. Phones rang nonstop, reporters typed furiously, editors shouted across the room. I caught snippets, words like indictments, subpoenas, fallout. But what froze me was when one young reporter whispered, "They found a body!" I turned sharply. "What did you just say?" The kid blinked, realizing I'd heard. Some John Doe burned in a warehouse outside town. Rumor is he was tied to Calloway's old circle. They're saying it might have been a hit." My blood ran cold. The old man. Caroline must have seen my face because she pulled me aside. "What is it?" I told her everything. The meeting at the campaign office, the envelope, the men who had stormed in. By the end, her hands were trembling. "You think it was him?" she whispered. "I don't think. I know." We sat in silence for a long moment, the newsroom buzzing around us. Finally, she said, "Then we have to keep going. For him, if nothing else." That night, we met with Tom in a secured office in D.C. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes. "You two kicked a hornet's nest," he said, rubbing his temples. "The story forced our hand. DOJ is moving faster than we wanted, but the scale of this, it's massive and dangerous." "Dangerous how?" I asked. Tom gave me a look I'll never forget. "These aren't just crooked politicians. This is organized money, tied to contractors, energy firms, even overseas entities, people who don't play by the law, people who erase problems." Caroline leaned forward. "Then you protect us. Witness protection, safe houses, whatever it takes." Tom shook his head. "You're not witnesses. You're whistleblowers who went public before we could lock it down. That means you're targets and we can't shield you 24/7. I slammed my fist on the table. "So what? We just wait around to see who comes for us." Tom's eyes were grim. "No. You go dark again. Disappear. Let us handle the rest." But disappearing felt like surrender, and surrender was how Richard had gotten away with it for years. Back at the apartment, Caroline paced, while I sat staring at the envelope again. "If we vanish," she said, "they win. They'll spin the story, bury the evidence, and we'll just be a headline that fades." "And if we stay visible?" I asked. She met my eyes. "Then every move we make has to be louder than their threats. No shadows, no silence. We fight in the open." I thought of the old man again, the way he shoved the envelope into my hands. His last words echoed, "Use it." I nodded slowly. "Then we fight." The next morning, we went on national television, together. No hiding, no vague statements. We showed the documents, explained the money trail, named the names. Caroline read aloud from the old man's notes, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. The host leaned forward. "Aren't you afraid? These are powerful people." I looked straight into the camera. They should be the ones afraid, because the truth is out now, and it's bigger than any one of them. The broadcast went viral. Overnight, we weren't just local whistleblowers anymore. We were national figures, faces tied to one of the largest corruption scandals in decades. And that was when the threats escalated from shadows and spray paint to something far more direct. The first attempt on my life came 3 days later. It happened on a Wednesday, just after noon. I'd finished an interview at a local radio station and stepped outside into the kind of crisp, brittle sunlight that feels like winter biting through your coat. Caroline had stayed behind at the Gazette to coordinate a follow-up article. I walked to my car in the parking lot, phone in one hand, scanning my messages. The lot was mostly empty except for a delivery van idling 2 rows over. Nothing about it seemed off. No markings, no windows, just a white van with the engine running. I had just slipped my key into the driver-assy door when I heard the faintest hiss, a sound like compressed air. Instinct kicked in before thought. I dropped flat to the asphalt. A heartbeat later, the van's side door slammed open. A man leaned out, something metallic glinting in his hands. A dart gun or a silenced weapon, I couldn't tell. I rolled under the car as the first dart pinged off the door where my chest had been. My heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear. Then the parking lot erupted in noise, tires screeching, a horn blaring. Another car, a black SUV, had barreled around the corner and cut between me and the van. Its doors flew open, and two men in tactical gear spilled out, weapons drawn. "Federal agents! Drop it!" one of them barked. The man in the van hesitated for a second too long. They surged forward, and in a blur of motion he was dragged out and face down on the asphalt. The driver hit the gas and sped off, the van fishtailing wildly. One of the agents fired at the tires but missed as the vehicle vanished around the corner. I scrambled out from under my car, knees and palms scraped raw, my breath ragged. "You're lucky," one of the agents said, pulling me upright. "We've been tailing you since the story broke. This was a professional hit." They hustled me into the SUV, sirens already wailing in the distance. Caroline's voice cracked through the secure line minutes later. "Oh my God, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I managed, though my hands were still trembling. "They tried. The feds stopped them." Tom met us at a safe house later that evening, his face grim. "That wasn't a warning shot," he said. "That was the machine sending a message. You're too public to just disappear, so they'll try to make an accident." Caroline sat across from him, pale but defiant. "Then we stay public. We doubled down. If they want to take us out, they'll have to do it in front of the whole world." Tom exhaled slowly. "We're moving on multiple targets now. Grand juries, sealed indictments. The old man's documents cracked open things we didn't even know existed. But until the arrests happen, you're both still in the crosshairs." I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "Then finish it. Don't let them walk away this time." Tom nodded. "We're close. Days, maybe weeks. But you need to be ready. When this comes down, it's going to be violent and public. You'll be the face of it whether you want to or not." That night in the safe house, Caroline and I sat by the window, staring at the empty street below. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "Do you ever wonder if we're in too deep?" "All the time," I said. "But it's too late to back out. The only way out is through." The next morning, the first wave of arrests hit the news. State officials, campaign staffers, donors, names we only seen in footnotes of the old man's documents, all marched out in handcuffs on live television. The machine was crumbling. But Tom's warning proved true. The closer we got to exposing everything, the more dangerous the days became. Anonymous threats flooded our inboxes. Strange cars idled near our safe house. Once, late at night, we found a red dot painted on the front window, a silent promise that someone was watching. Still, we kept pushing. Every new arrest, every new headline was one more nail in the coffin of the network that had hidden behind Richard Calloway. And then, just as the final indictments were about to drop, we got a call that froze my blood. It wasn't from Tom. It wasn't from any agent. It was Richard Calloway himself, from prison. The call came through a secure line at the safe house. No caller ID, no warning. Just a low buzz from the phone on the table. Tom was out briefing another team. Only Caroline and I were there. We exchanged a glance before I picked it up. "Hello?" A pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard since the trial, raspier now, but still carrying that same unnerving calm. "You've done quite a thing," Richard Calloway said. "Quite a thing indeed." For a moment I couldn't speak. I just stared at the receiver, knuckles whitening. "How did you—" "They let me make one call a week," he said, almost chuckling. "I chose you. You should feel honored." "What do you want, Richard?" "To warn you," he said simply. "You think you've won, but you've only cut off one arm. The body still lives, and it's angry." Caroline leaned closer, eyes wide. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "You're bluffing," I said. "The network's collapsing. people are in cuffs." "You're naive," Richard whispered. "The ones in cuffs are expendable. The ones who mattered are still free. They're already planning what to do with you." I felt my pulse pounding in my throat. "Why call me then? Why warn me if you're on their side?" Another pause. Then, softer. "Because I wasn't on their side. Not really. I was a front, a pawn, and pawns get sacrificed." I almost laughed. "You stole from me. You stole from everyone. And now you want sympathy?" "No," he said, and for the first time there was no smoothness in his voice, just something hollow. "I want you to survive, because if you don't, everything you think you exposed dies with you." I hesitated. "What are you saying?" "I left things," he said. "Documents, insurance. If you're smart, you'll find them before they do." Then, in a tone that chilled me to the bone, he added, "They're closer than you think, even now." The line went dead. Caroline and I stared at each other, the silence between us heavy. What did he mean? "Even now," she whispered. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. We froze. Tom wasn't due back for hours. Another knock, louder this time. "Federal agents," a voice called. "Open up." Caroline moved to the window, peeking through the blinds. Her face went pale. "It's not them?" she mouthed. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the envelope, the one with the old man's documents, and shoved it into my jacket. "Back door!" I hissed. We slipped out through the kitchen as the front door rattled under heavy hands, down the back stairs into the alley. Footsteps thundered above us. Caroline clutched my arm. "Where are we going?" "Richard said he left something. We find it. Now." "But where?" I thought of his words. "Before they do." Then I remembered the one place Richard had always returned to, even before the campaign. The warehouse where he'd launched his first venture, long since abandoned. We ducked into a waiting car we'd stashed 2 blocks over and sped off, the safe house shrinking in the rearview mirror. As the city lights blurred past, Caroline gripped the dashboard. "If this is a trap, it's already a trap," I said grimly. "But whatever Richard left, it's our only shot." We drove in silence for miles, the tension in the car thick as smoke. Finally, we pulled up to the warehouse. Its windows were broken, its sign half hanging. A place no one should care about anymore, unless it held something worth killing for. The warehouse smelled of mildew and rust, the kind of damp rot that seeps into your clothes and skin. Our footsteps echoed as we moved through the cavernous space, beams of our flashlights slicing across broken pallets and rusted barrels. "This feels wrong," Caroline whispered. Her breath fogged in the cold air. "Like walking into a grave." "Maybe that's what he wanted," I muttered. A grave for his secrets. We found a staircase bolted to the wall, its metal steps groaning under our weight. At the top was a narrow office overlooking the warehouse floor, its glass windows shattered years ago. Inside, dust lay thick on the desk, but there were signs someone had been here more recently. A coffee cup with a faint brown ring, a chair moved out from the wall, papers scattered as though in a hurry. Caroline sifted through the desk drawers, pulling out old invoices and bank ledgers. "Junk," she said. But I noticed something odd on the far wall, a section of paneling that looked newer than the rest, like it had been replaced. I ran my fingers along the seam until I found a small latch, almost invisible in the shadows. With a click, the panel swung open, revealing a hollow space. Inside was a metal box, about the size of a briefcase. Caroline's eyes widened. "That has to be it." I pulled it out, dust coating my hands, and set it on the desk. It was locked with an old combination dial. Before I could even start working on it, we heard it. The crunch of tires outside. Headlights swept across the broken windows, flooding the warehouse floor with light. Caroline grabbed my arm. "They followed us." Adrenaline surged through me. We ducked down behind the desk, clutching the box. Shadows moved on the warehouse floor. 3, maybe 4 figures with flashlights. Their voices were low, too faint to make out, but their footsteps were deliberate. "They know," I whispered. "They know what's here." Caroline's hand found mine, her grip tight. "Then we can't leave without it." The figures spread out, beams of light sweeping the floor. One of them shouted, "Check the office!" We scrambled. I twisted the dial on the box, trying random numbers, my fingers slick with sweat. Nothing. "They're coming!" Caroline hissed, eyes wide with panic. Then I remembered something Richard had once said during one of his campaign speeches, a smug line he repeated often. "Family first. Always." I spun the dial. 1972, the year his first son was born. With a sharp click, the lock popped open. Inside were stacks of documents, flash drives, even photographs, names, accounts, wire transfers, blackmail material. It was a ledger of the entire machine, not just Richard's piece of it. "This is it," I breathed. "This is the core." Footsteps thundered up the metal stairs. Caroline stuffed the papers into her bag while I grabbed the drives. The office door rattled, then burst open, as a man in a dark coat surged inside, gun raised. "Run!" I shouted, shoving the box into his chest. The impact knocked him back a step, giving us just enough time to bolt through the shattered window frame and onto the warehouse roof. Cold air hit my face as we scrambled across the corrugated steel, boots slipping on rust. Shouts rose behind us, flashlights cutting through the dark. "There!" someone yelled. Bullets cracked the night, punching holes through the metal around us. Sparks flew. Caroline screamed but kept running. We slid down the far side of the roof and dropped hard into the gravel. My knees screamed with pain, but I forced myself up, dragging her with me. The car was parked just beyond the fence. "If we could reach it!" A spotlight flared, blinding us. Another black SUV roared to life, blocking the exit. Men spilled out, their guns glinting under the beams. We froze, the bag heavy with evidence, the night humming with danger. Caroline's hand found mine again. "What now?" she whispered. I swallowed hard, the roar of the SUV's engine vibrating in my chest. "Now," I said, eyes locked on the approaching men. "We find out just how badly they want to keep this buried." In the weeks that followed, the headlines told the rest of the story. Indictments spread like wildfire, pulling down not just Richard's allies, but the shadowy figures who had funded, protected, and used him. A senator resigned. A corporate board dissolved. For once, the system that had always seemed untouchable began to crack under the weight of its own secrets. Caroline's articles became part of the public record, cited in hearings and inquiries. She was no longer just a local reporter. She was the journalist who helped tear the mask off a machine. As for me, I never got my $250,000 back. That money was gone forever, swallowed by greed and arrogance. But what I gained was something I hadn't even known I was fighting for, the proof that one voice, one truth, could unravel a web of lies built by men who thought they were untouchable. Richard Calloway would spend the rest of his life in prison, a cautionary tale of hypocrisy, his family values campaign now a punchline in political history. The network behind him had been dragged into daylight, and though corruption never truly dies, it had been forced to retreat, weakened and exposed. I carried scars, burned bridges, lost business, sleepless nights haunted by the shadows of what might have been. But I also carried something stronger, the knowledge that silence had not won. In the end, that was the real victory. Not revenge, not even justice. The truth had survived. And because of that, so had I.